I never saw it coming. I don't know if that makes me naive or just blindly trusting, but I can tell you one thing. Ignorance is not bliss. It's a slow, cruel torture, like being the only one in a room who doesn't know the joke everyone's laughing at. Except the joke is your life, and everyone's in on it but you. Samantha and I had been married for 8 years. She was everything to me. My best friend, my partner, the person I wanted to grow old with. Things weren't perfect, but I never thought they'd need to be. We had our routine, like any couple married that long. Weekends were spent doing chores, the occasional date night, and quiet Sunday mornings drinking coffee together. Nothing exciting, but it was ours. Lately, though, Samantha had been different. It started with small changes. She became more distant, more irritable. The usual, right? Life gets busy, work piles up, and people drift. I figured she was just stressed. She'd mentioned wanting to get back into shape, and I encouraged her, even bought her a membership at one of the nicer gyms in town. It was something she had been talking about for months, and I thought it might help her feel better. And that's how he came into our lives. Her gym trainer, Jake. Tall, built like a statue, with that charm only men who live inside the walls of a gym seem to have. I met him once, briefly, when I dropped Samantha off for a session. He had that annoyingly perfect smile and was just a little too friendly for my liking. I didn't think much of it then. I trusted her, and she seemed happy. If this trainer was helping her get back into shape and boosting her confidence, I wasn't about to be the jealous husband. But the changes didn't stop with just her mood. She started spending more and more time at the gym. What was supposed to be an hour workout session turned into 2, then 3 hours. She'd come home later and later, sometimes missing dinner entirely. When I asked, she'd just laugh it off, telling me she'd stayed to work on her form or that Jake had suggested extra cardio. I didn't want to push. I was proud of her for committing to her fitness, so I let it go. But then came the late-night texts. They started small, just a few here and there. I'd catch her smiling at her phone when we were watching TV, and when I'd ask who it was, she'd always say it was a friend or something about the gym. She was good at deflecting, brushing it off with a quick joke or a kiss on the cheek. And like an idiot, I believed her every time. It wasn't until a Saturday afternoon that everything began to unravel. I had come home early from work, earlier than expected. I thought maybe we could spend some time together, grab lunch, maybe even surprise her at the gym and cheer her on during a workout. But when I walked into the house, it was quiet. Too quiet. Samantha's car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. But the house felt empty. My first thought was that she was upstairs, maybe napping or in the shower. But as I moved through the hallway, I noticed her gym bag was slung carelessly over a chair in the living room, her water bottle still half full. Weird. I called her name. No answer. Then I heard it, a soft laugh. Muffled, coming from upstairs. I froze. It was Samantha's laugh, but different, playful, flirty. My heart started to race. Something was off. My gut screamed it. I crept up the stairs, each step heavier than the last, as though I was walking towards something I didn't want to see but knew I had to. At the top of the stairs, I stopped in front of our bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see inside. I pushed it open gently, my breath caught in my throat, and there they were. Samantha, my wife, sitting on the edge of our bed, with Jake, her gym trainer, standing in front of her, his shirt off, muscles flexed as he leaned in, whispering something that made her giggle. She touched his arm, the same way she used to touch mine. A familiarity, an intimacy, that sent a white-hot wave of rage crashing through me. They didn't notice me at first, too wrapped up in each other to see me standing there like an outsider in my own life. I felt the world tilt, like I had stepped out of reality into some twisted alternate universe. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tear him out of my house. But I couldn't move. My body was frozen, trapped between the urge to confront them and the suffocating weight of betrayal that I was still trying to comprehend. Finally, Jake saw me. His smile faltered, his body stiffening as he straightened up and took a step back. Samantha whipped around, her eyes wide with shock, guilt written all over her face. "Jason," she whispered, her voice shaking, but it wasn't an apology. Not yet. Maybe she thought I didn't see enough, that she could still salvage this moment. But there was no salvaging. There was no coming back from what I had just seen. Samantha's eyes locked on mine, wide and panicked. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain away the image burned into my mind. Our bedroom, her sitting there with him. For a brief moment, I thought she might try to deny it, to lie her way out, but the look of guilt on her face said it all. "Jason, I can explain," she stammered, standing up quickly, pulling her shirt down like that somehow made things better. She stepped toward me, but I held up my hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Explain?" I repeated, my voice low, too calm for the fire that was raging inside me. "You think there's an explanation for this?" Jake stood awkwardly by the bed, fumbling for his shirt. He didn't say a word, just looked at the floor like a guilty teenager caught in someone else's house. He wasn't cocky now, not the confident trainer with his perfect smile. He was scared. "You need to leave," I said to him, my voice barely above a whisper. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to do something. Hit him, throw him out the window, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew why. He grabbed his things and hurried out of the room without a word, the sound of his footsteps heavy on the stairs, followed by the front door slamming shut. And then it was just the two of us, Samantha and me, standing there in the ruins of what was once our life. I'm sorry, Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like, I swear." I couldn't help it, I laughed. A short, bitter laugh that echoed through the room. "Not what it looks like." "Really, Sam?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is." My voice was rising now, the rage bubbling over as I gestured to the bed, to her. "You and him. In our house. In our bedroom." Her face crumpled, tears filling her eyes, but they didn't move me. Not this time. I wasn't going to fall for the tears, for the excuses. "Jason, she started, but I cut her off. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking away from mine, and that was all the answer I needed. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how much to admit, how much I already knew. It just happened," she said softly, barely above a whisper. "It didn't mean anything, I swear." I shook my head, the anger coursing through me like a poison. "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, stepping toward her. "You brought him into our bed, Samantha. You laughed with him. I haven't heard you laugh like that in months. It sure as hell meant something." Tears streamed down her face now, and for a moment, she looked like the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. But that woman was gone. Or maybe she had never really existed. "I was lonely, Jason," she said, her voice breaking. "You've been so distant lately. You're always working, always busy, and I didn't know how to reach you anymore. Jake was he was there." I stared at her, disbelief mixing with the anger. "So this is my fault?" I asked, incredulous. "You're blaming me for this? For your choices?" "I'm not blaming you. I didn't know what else to do," she sobbed. "I've been feeling so alone, and—" "Stop," I said sharply, cutting her off again. "Just stop. You're not going to stand here and make excuses for this. You don't get to play the victim." My heart pounded in my chest, the reality of the situation sinking in deeper with every word. "I was here, Samantha. Maybe I've been busy, maybe I've been stressed, but I was here. And you chose to do this." Her sobs grew louder, and she sank down onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. I stood there, numb, staring at the woman I thought I knew, wondering how we had gotten here, how everything had fallen apart so completely. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then the image of her with Jake flashed in my mind again, and the sympathy was replaced by a cold, bitter anger. "I want you to leave," I said quietly, my voice steady now. "I can't look at you. I can't even be in the same room as you." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. "Jason, no. Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can." "Go," I repeated, my voice harder this time. "Pack a bag and go. I don't care where. Just get out." Samantha stared at me for a long moment, like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. And maybe she didn't. I wasn't the same man who had walked through the front door an hour ago. That man was gone, destroyed by the betrayal that now hung heavy between us. Finally, she stood, moving slowly to the closet. I watched as she grabbed a duffel bag and began shoving clothes into it, her hands shaking, her sobs quiet now. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand more answers, to understand how we had gone from a happy marriage to this. But another part of me was too exhausted, too broken to care. When she was done, she stood at the door, her eyes pleading with me one last time. "I'm sorry, Jason," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I said nothing, just stared at her, my face a mask of cold indifference. She hesitated, waiting for me to say something, to give her some sign that there was hope. But there was nothing left to say. And then, she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was alone. Alone in the house we had built together, surrounded by memories that suddenly felt hollow, meaningless. I sank onto the bed, the same bed where she had betrayed me, and stared at the wall, trying to process the wreckage of my life. This was it. This was the end. And I had no idea what to do next. I sat there on the edge of the bed for what felt like hours, my mind running in circles, trying to make sense of everything. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the occasional distant sound from outside. Cars driving by, birds chirping, the world moving on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The bed felt foreign now. This room, this house, it all felt like a lie. I looked around at the familiar walls, the photos of Samantha and me from happier times, the life we had built together, and I felt like I was looking at someone else's memories. None of it felt real anymore. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, the weight of it all became too much. I couldn't just sit here. Not in this house, not in this room. I stood up, my legs shaky, and made my way downstairs. The living room was just as I had left it. The gym bag she had carelessly tossed on the chair still sat there, a reminder of how casually she had brought him into our home, into our life. I wanted to tear it apart, break things, destroy everything that had any connection to her. But I couldn't. I was too tired, too drained. I felt like a shell, empty and hollow, with nothing left to give. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, though my hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. As I took a sip, I glanced at my phone on the counter. There were messages, work stuff mostly, things that felt so unimportant now, but one text caught my eye. It was from Mike, one of my closest friends. "How's the trip? You back yet?" I had completely forgotten about my trip, the one that had brought me home early, the one I was supposed to be on for another 2 days. Mike didn't know. No one did. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What was I supposed to say? How do you tell your best friend that your life just fell apart, that your wife was cheating on you with her gym trainer? But then something else hit me. Mike had a weird habit of always knowing things before anyone told him. He was the guy you went to when you needed to know who was seeing who, or what was going on in the neighborhood. Gossip wasn't his thing, but he always had an ear to the ground. A sudden, sickening thought crept into my mind. Did he already know? I typed out a response quickly. "Got home early. Things are not good. Need to talk. You free?" It was vague, but I couldn't bring myself to explain everything over text. He replied almost immediately. "Yeah, man, I can swing by. You good?" I didn't know how to answer that. Was I good? Absolutely not. But I didn't want to unload everything just yet. "Just come over," I typed. 15 minutes later, Mike was knocking on my front door. I let him in without saying much, just a nod and a gesture toward the living room. He looked at me closely, his brow furrowed with concern, clearly sensing that something was really wrong. We sat down, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. The weight of what had just happened was still pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe, let alone explain everything. Finally, Mike broke the silence. "What happened, man? You look like you've been through hell." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "Yeah, you could say that." He waited, watching me, giving me the space to get it out. And then, slowly, I told him. I told him everything. The distance that had been growing between Samantha and me, the gym trainer, the late-night texts, and finally, what I had walked in on earlier that day. Mike sat there, his face a mixture of shock and anger as I spoke, his fists clenched on his knees. "That bastard," he muttered when I finished, shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't believe it. Samantha, of all people. I mean, I know you guys have had a rough patch, but this? What the hell?" I nodded, feeling numb. I don't even know what to think anymore. It's like everything we had, everything I thought we had, it's just gone. I don't even know who she is. Mike was quiet for a moment, and then he leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "Did you have any idea? Like, did you suspect anything before today?" I hesitated. I had been thinking about that ever since I caught her with Jake. All the little signs I had ignored. The late nights, the gym sessions that lasted too long, the way she always seemed distracted, like she was somewhere else even when she was sitting right next to me. "I guess there were signs," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to believe she could do something like this. Mike sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Man, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine what you're going through right now." "Yeah, well, neither can I," muttered. I stared at the floor, trying to make sense of it all, trying to find some way to put the pieces back together. But nothing made sense. Nothing fit. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the situation settling in. Finally, Mike spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. "Look, you don't have to figure everything out right now, but you've got to decide what you want to do next. Are you going to talk to her? Or are you leaving?" I finished for him. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I didn't know if I had it in me to have another conversation with her. What was there left to say? She had lied, betrayed me in the worst possible way. How could I ever trust her again? "I don't know," I admitted. "I really don't know." Mike nodded. "Whatever you decide, just know that I've got your back. If you need anything, a place to crash, whatever, I'm here." I looked at him, grateful for the support, but still feeling completely lost. "Thanks," I said, my voice hollow. "I might take you up on that." He stayed for another hour, talking through things, helping me get my head around what had happened. By the time he left, I felt a little more grounded, but the pain was still there, sharp and unforgiving. I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to get past it. After he left, I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, the silence pressing in on me once again. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or the day after that. I didn't know if Samantha and I would ever talk again, or if this was the end. All I knew was that everything had changed, and there was no going back. The next morning felt like waking up in someone else's life. I had barely slept, just lying there on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Samantha's face, heard her laugh with him. It was like some cruel loop playing over and over in my mind, refusing to let me escape the reality I didn't want to face. When I finally dragged myself off the couch, the house felt colder, emptier. The silence, once comforting, now felt oppressive. I looked around at the living room, at the traces of her still everywhere. Her favorite blanket draped over the chair, her coffee mug sitting on the counter. It all felt like a mockery now, like pieces of a life that had been nothing but a lie. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. I grabbed my phone, my fingers hovering over the contacts list, unsure of who to call. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to explain, but I couldn't be alone, either. Before I could second-guess myself, I texted Mike again. "Can I come over?" It didn't take him long to respond. "Of course, man. Come whenever you're ready." I grabbed a few things, clothes, my laptop, my keys, and walked out the door, leaving the house that no longer felt like home. As I drove to Mike's place, I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting Samantha to call or text, to apologize or beg me to come back. But there was nothing, just silence. It was like she had already given up. Mike's place was a modest two-story in a quiet neighborhood, far from the chaos of downtown. When I pulled up, he was already standing on the porch, waiting for me. He gave me a nod as I got out of the car, his face serious but understanding. "Glad you came," he said, his voice low. "Come on in." The moment I stepped inside, the weight of everything hit me again. I felt like I was moving in slow motion, like my mind was stuck in the past while the world moved on without me. Mike led me into the living room, where he had already set up a few beers on the coffee table. "Figured you might need something to take the edge off," he said with a half-smile, trying to lighten the mood. I managed a weak grin, but it didn't reach my eyes. I took a beer and sat down on the couch, sinking into the cushions like they could somehow absorb the pain. Mike sat across from me, giving me space, but watching me carefully. "So, did she try to reach out? Talk to you?" he asked after a few minutes of silence. I shook my head. "Nothing. It's like she's already decided we're done. Like, she doesn't even care." Mike frowned, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "That's messed up, man. After everything you've been through together, she owes you more than that. She should be fighting to fix this, not just walking away." "I don't know if I'd even want to hear it if she did," I admitted. "I don't think I can handle any more lies." He nodded slowly, understanding. "You're probably right. But still, it's weird, you know? She just let you leave. No explanation, no fight." That had been bothering me too. Samantha wasn't one to back down from anything, not even a petty argument. The fact that she hadn't chased after me, hadn't called or texted, made me wonder if this had been going on longer than I realized. Maybe she had already checked out, emotionally, and Jake was just the final nail in the coffin. Mike seemed to be thinking the same thing. "You think this has been going on for a while?" "I don't know," I said, rubbing my face, feeling the exhaustion pulling me down. "It could have been. She's been distant for months. I thought it was just stress, work, the usual. But now, I don't know what to think." Mike sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's the worst part. Not knowing. It's like, you start questioning everything, right? Wondering if the last few months, or years, were real, or if she was just pretending." He wasn't wrong. Ever since I caught her with Jake, I had been replaying our entire relationship in my head, trying to pinpoint when things had started falling apart. Had it been gradual? Or had I just been too blind to see what was right in front of me? "I don't even know who she is anymore," I said, my voice hollow. "It's like I've been living with a stranger." Mike didn't say anything for a moment, just nodded in understanding. He cracked open another beer, offering it to me, but I waved him off. My head was already spinning, and alcohol wasn't going to help me think any clearer. "So, what now?" Mike asked, breaking the silence. "What are you gonna do?" I shook my head, feeling lost. "I don't know. I can't go back there. Not yet. I need to figure things out. But the thought of talking to her, of trying to get answers, I don't even know if I want them anymore." Mike leaned back, his face thoughtful. "Maybe you don't need to talk to her. Maybe you just need to move on. Cut her out and start fresh." It was easier said than done. The idea of moving on, of starting over, felt like trying to climb a mountain with no end in sight. But maybe Mike was right. Maybe I needed to stop looking for closure where there wasn't any. "I can stay here for a while, right?" I asked, knowing he'd say yes, but needing to hear it anyway. "Of course, man," Mike said without hesitation. "Stay as long as you need. No rush." I nodded, grateful for the support, but still feeling like I was drowning in a sea of uncertainty. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed at Mike's place, barely leaving the house. I couldn't bring myself to go back to work, to deal with people or responsibilities. Mike checked in on me constantly, making sure I ate, making sure I slept, but most of the time, I just felt numb. It wasn't until the third day that my phone buzzed with a message from Samantha. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest, debating whether or not to open it. Finally, after what felt like hours, I unlocked my phone and read the text. "I'm sorry, Jason. Can we talk?" That was it. No explanation. No begging for forgiveness. Just a simple request to talk. I stared at the message, feeling a mix of anger and sadness bubbling up inside me. Did I even want to hear what she had to say? Was there anything she could say that would make this better? But I needed answers. As much as I hated to admit it, I couldn't just walk away without knowing why. I needed to hear it from her, to understand how we had gotten to this point. I took a deep breath and typed back, "Yeah, let's talk." We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. I didn't want to go back to the house, and I wasn't ready to let her know where I was staying. I got there early, finding a table in the back corner, away from everyone else. My nerves were shot. My stomach twisted in knots as I waited for her to arrive. When she finally walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked tired, worn down, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes found mine across the room, and she hesitated for a moment before making her way over. "Jason," she said softly as she sat down, her voice shaky. I didn't respond, just watched her, waiting for her to start, waiting for her to explain. She took a deep breath, looking down at her hands, then back up at me. "I know you probably hate me right now," she said quietly, "and I don't blame you. But I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen." "Then why did it?" I asked, my voice hard. She swallowed, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know," she whispered. It just happened. I was feeling so lost, so alone, and Jake, he was just there. He made me feel good about myself, like I mattered." "So this is about your self-esteem?" I asked bitterly. "You destroyed our marriage because you needed someone to boost your ego?" She flinched at my words, but she didn't deny it. "I'm not trying to make excuses," she said. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you in the worst possible way. I didn't know how to fix it." "Did you even try?" I asked, my voice rising with anger. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you didn't care enough to even try." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. "I did care, Jason. I do care. But I felt like you were slipping away, like we were slipping away, and I didn't know how to hold on." I leaned back in my chair, staring at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that this was all just a terrible mistake, a moment of weakness that we could somehow fix. But another part of me knew that this wasn't something we could come back from. "Do you love him?" I asked suddenly, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she shook her head quickly. "No. God, no. It was never about love. It was just a stupid mistake. A mistake that's destroyed everything," I said quietly. She nodded, her face crumpling as she sobbed into her hands. And as I watched her cry, I realized something. I didn't feel anything. No anger. No sadness. Just emptiness. I sat there, watching Samantha break down in front of me, her sobs filling the silence between us. But despite the tears streaming down her face, despite the raw emotion in her voice, I felt nothing. No rage, no sadness, not even the satisfaction of seeing her suffer. I had thought that this confrontation would bring some kind of closure, some kind of catharsis, but instead, it left me hollow. Her words hung in the air. I didn't know how to hold on, echoing in my mind. Hold on to what? The life we built together? The marriage that was now nothing but a pile of ashes? She looked up at me, eyes red and swollen. "Jason, please say something." I stared back at her, trying to find the right words, but nothing came. What was there to say? I couldn't fix this, and neither could she. The damage was done, and no amount of apologies or tears was going to change that. "You made your choice, Samantha," I finally said, my voice flat, emotionless. "You decided to turn to him instead of talking to me. You chose to let this happen." She flinched, as if my words were physically hitting her. "I know," she whispered. "I know I screwed up. I betrayed you." "Betrayed doesn't even begin to cover it," I interrupted, my voice harder now. "You took everything we built, everything I thought we had, and you threw it away. For what? A fling? A boost to your ego? Was it worth it?" She shook her head frantically, wiping at her eyes. "No, Jason, it wasn't. It was the worst mistake of my life." I leaned forward, my gaze locked on hers. "Then why didn't you stop? Why didn't you come to me before it got to this point? Why, Sam?" She opened her mouth to answer, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just sat there, staring at me with a helpless expression that only made my frustration grow. I could see the regret in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. Regret doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't undo the pain, and it doesn't make up for what she had done. After a long pause, she finally spoke again, her voice barely audible. "I was scared. Scared of what I'd lost, scared of what you'd say. I thought you'd already given up on me. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Me? Give up on her? I'd fought for this marriage. For us, even when things started to feel distant. I had been there, showing up, trying to fix whatever was wrong. But she had checked out, long before I realized it. She had turned to someone else instead of facing the problems head-on with me. I never gave up on you, Samantha, I said, my voice low. I was still here, fighting. You were the one who walked away. Her head dropped into her hands again, and her sobs grew louder, but they didn't move me. The sight of her broken in front of me only made me feel more numb. This woman, the one I had loved for so many years, was a stranger now. I don't know what to do, she cried, her voice desperate. I don't know how to fix this. Please, Jason, just tell me what to do. The question hit me harder than I expected. What did I want her to do? Could she even fix this? Could anything repair the shattered remains of our marriage? I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. I don't know, Samantha, I said, my voice steady but cold. Maybe there's nothing left to fix. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with panic. No, don't say that. Please, Jason, don't. I don't know what else to say, I interrupted, my voice rising now. You cheated on me, Sam. You destroyed my trust in you, in us. And I don't think there's a way back from that. Her face crumpled again, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks, but I didn't have the energy to console her. I couldn't comfort her when I was the one who had been betrayed. I need time, I said finally, my voice softening just a fraction. I need to think. I need to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do now. But I can't do that here. I can't do it with you. She nodded, her shoulders shaking as she wiped at her face, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. I'll stay with Mike for a while, I continued. I can't come back to the house. Not yet. Her voice trembled as she spoke. What about us? Is this really the end? I looked at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything in the world, and I didn't know the answer. I didn't know if there was still a future for us, or if this was just the slow, painful end of everything we had built together. I don't know, I said honestly, but right now, I can't see a way forward. Samantha nodded, her face crumpling with pain, but she didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. We were both standing in the wreckage of our life together, and there were no words that could fix it. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her behind, her sobs still ringing in my ears. The weight of the decision, whether to try to salvage our marriage or to walk away for good, pressed down on me like a lead blanket. I had no idea where to go from here, but I knew one thing for sure. Things would never be the same again. Back at Mike's, I collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The conversation had drained me completely. I thought talking to her might give me some clarity, but instead, I felt more lost than ever. I had no answers, only more questions, more doubts. Mike walked in a few minutes later, looking at me carefully. How'd it go? I shook my head. It didn't. He sat down across from me, handing me a beer. That bad, huh? Worse, I muttered. I took a long swig of the beer, trying to dull the edge of everything. She said all the right things, apologized, cried, but it didn't change anything. It didn't make it better. Mike nodded, understanding. Sometimes it doesn't matter how sorry they are. Damage is done. I glanced over at him, feeling the weight of his words settle in. He was right. Maybe there was no coming back from this. Maybe this was just how it ended. So, what are you gonna do? Mike asked after a long silence. I stared at the floor, my mind racing. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living in the past, in the shadow of Samantha's betrayal. Whether or not we tried to fix things, I had to start thinking about myself, about what I wanted, about what my life would look like, with or without her. I don't know yet, I admitted, taking another sip of the beer. But I know I can't stay stuck like this. Mike nodded. You don't have to decide everything right now. Take it one day at a time. Figure out what's best for you. I appreciated his advice, but the uncertainty of it all still gnawed at me. For so long, my life had been tied to Samantha's, our plans, our future. Now, All of that was up in the air, and I had no idea what came next. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the first step was accepting that things were different now, that the life I thought I had wasn't real anymore. And maybe, just maybe, I could start building something new, one day at a time. The days that followed blurred together. I stayed at Mike's, mostly keeping to myself, lost in my own thoughts. Samantha texted a few times, short, careful messages asking how I was doing, asking if we could talk again. I ignored most of them. I wasn't ready for another conversation, not when I was still trying to figure out what the hell I wanted. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.